Alhamdulillah wa Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulih al-Kareem. Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today is Wednesday, the night of Thursday. It's the sixth day, or the sixth night of Dhul Qa'dah, 1,431 years after the Hijrah of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, corresponding with October 13th, 2010. And we have subtitled these classes as immunization shots. Immunization shots for those theological, philosophical, and ideological diseases that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prophesied would come, and they have come, and they will continue to come. And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yarhamukumullah, he's already informed us that in every single era, that's E-R-A, not E-R-R-O-R, in every single time period, there will always be those ulama who will point out those innovations and those heresies, and they will fight against them. So what we want to do this evening, inshallah, and we apologize for being late, but circumstances didn't allow us to get here on time. What we want to do, inshallah, and this, even though most of you, I've been noticing for months, don't write anything down, but for this one, I think you need to write. You're going to have to write, because we're going to try our best to give you some history of which the vast, and I'm saying it with confidence, the vast majority of you don't know about. Tonight you get names, you get dates, you get places. The vast majority of you, I'm absolutely sure, the vast majority of you don't know about. You may, as we said the other night, have heard some names, some groups, but tonight we have to mention, bring you some history, inshallah. So this evening, and this was already prepared, I should say part of this was already prepared by some of the brothers there in England. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them. This is what really happened. It is the history of the Muhajirun. The history of the Muhajirun, and what the Muhajirun don't want you or hope that you don't learn is a chronological history of the birth, the development, and inheritance of a tamyi' through the root of B-strain ikhwaniyah. There's a lot of words, a lot of, technical terms, but there's nothing else I can do. We can't keep trying to, we just have to give it to you. And it's time for you to bring your level up. Very few people today are using Windows 95. Very few people today are using Windows 98. You have to upgrade your operating system. You have to come up to speed, brothers. You have to learn. You have to study this history of Salafiyya in America, how it began, and those groups that were Trojans hiding amongst the Salafis and then just sprung out to protect yourselves and your families. Saying it, and really, is really making me want to cry, because most of you, I have to say it, you're all miskeen. You are really in bad shape. You're claiming Salafiyya and you don't know anything. And you're going to be taken over by these diseases if you don't start studying it and learning these things. I'm telling you, that stuff has hit us. It's right here with us, in the ranks. If you brothers don't start studying, I'm telling you, your kids, that stuff, that gang stuff and all that stuff on the streets, this is worse. It's way worse. You have to learn about Salafiyah. You have to learn about Hizbiyah. You have to, brothers. You can't just keep talking about your pants being above the ankles and wearing henna in your beard and having a beard. That's not Salafiyah restricted. That's not all to Salafiyah. You have to learn, brothers. We keep saying it over and over and over again. Stop using slogans and clothes as an indication of your Salafiyah. You have to start learning. Our brothers in England, they say, where it all began. The 1930s, the 1940s. The vast majority of us in here weren't around during that time. There's probably only one person in this entire room right now that was around that time. He's sitting to my left. Hafethahullah wa sallamahullah min kulli su'a makruh. That's Sheikh Murad. And I'm absolutely sure, even though he was around at that time, inshallah, he didn't have a clue about what we're going to say right now. So that makes all of us. All right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve him and protect him from every evil and dislike thing. So our brothers, they say, where it all began. The 1930s, the 1940s. Let's take the lower number. How many years ago is 30s? 80. 80 years. We're in 2010. Right? So it just goes to show you how far back in our modern time this stuff began. The brothers, they say, Al-Banna. Al-Banna. When he says Al-Banna, they mean Hassan al-Banna. Hassan al-Banna was from where, brothers? Egypt. Is he talking about, or the brothers talking about our Sheikh Hassan al-Banna? No. Is he talking about the Sheikh, his brother that just died, Muhammad al-Banna? They're unrelated, same last name. This Hassan al-Banna, for those who don't know, is the founder, the mu'assis of the deviant political group called Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun or Ikhwanul Muslimin. Same thing. It began in what country? Egypt. Egypt. And may Allah guide him. I remember sitting in one of those classes that Osama al-Qusi, may Allah guide him and rectify his affairs. I remember sitting there in that class in Egypt, in Ain Shams, where he said, if you look, and we've said this before, he said, if you look at the majority of the deviant political / Islamic groups in the entire world, he said, I guarantee you their origin was Egypt. You look at any political group, almost all of them, either they started in Egypt or the groups that you find in different places in the world came from one of those groups. They're an offshoot of one of those groups that came from Egypt, or an offshoot from the offshoot of a group that came from Egypt. Right? We're talking about the political groups. We're not talking about those groups on the other side of the fence, like those pseudo-spiritual groups, like the Jamaatul Tabligh, for instance. We're not talking about them, the Sufis. We're talking about the political groups, the groups that promote jihad as their dawah, the groups that promote takfir as their dawah. And once again, some of these terminologies, we don't have a lot of time to explain them. That's what I'm saying. You brothers have to start studying, because I don't have enough time. Me specifically, in this masjid, I don't have enough time. I have 12 weeks left as the imam. 12 weeks. That's it. You've got to start studying, brothers, I'm telling you. Because I'm not your savior. I'm not your savior. All right? So the brothers, they say, Hassan al-Banna, who is the founder of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, that deviant political group that we mentioned last week or last class, that Sheikh Hafethahullah said, in my opinion, the two groups that are more harmful and dangerous on the Salafi manhaj and the people of Salafiyah are the Jamaatul Tabligh, who are not a political group. They are an apolitical group. And the Ikhwanul Muslimin. Remember, the Jamaatul Tabligh are not a political group. They are an apolitical group. And any of you brothers that remember that from high school or college, or maybe even not from there, you know what apolitical means, right? When you put that A in front of it, what does that mean? Antonym. It's the antonym of the word that comes after it. So when you say asexual, that means a person is against sex. Apolitical, you mean they're against politics. The Jamaatul Tabligh are anti-politics. So if you hear that somebody is a Tablighi and he's involved in going to see the mayor or something like that, believe me, he's not Tablighi. Because they're against politics. All right? Their whole thing is making dawah to having good character. That's it. As for the other groups, like the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, they are political. Hassan al-Banna is the founder of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Our brothers, they say that when he founded that group, one of the principles that he made up himself that has no origin from the Imams of the Salaf going back to the Salaf themselves. And the Salaf, of course, we know as Salaf al-Salih are three generations. The first of them are the best of the three, who are the Sahaba. And then the Tabi'un, who followed them in righteousness, because all of the Tabi'un didn't follow them in righteousness. Meaning, they went a little to the right and a little to the left sometimes, but we're talking about the Tabi'un, who followed the Sahaba in righteousness, and then the third group, the Atba' at-Tabi'in in the third generation. All right? So, Hassan al-Banna, one of the principles, one of the false qa'ida batila, one of the false principles that he made up is as follows. نتعاون فيما اختلفنا عليه ونعذر بعضنا بعضا فيما اختلفنا فيه. Let us cooperate in that which we agree upon. And let us pardon and excuse each other in that which we disagree. We'll say this principle again. The principle is, let us cooperate in that which we agree upon. And let us pardon or excuse each other in that which we disagree. That principle is a corrupt, false principle that has no place and no origin from the Book of Allah, nor the authentic Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, nor the Sahaba. This is a false, corrupted, made-up principle by Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin there in the country of Egypt. All right? Now, our brothers have provided the implications and the practical effects of that principle. The implications and the practical effects. What do we mean by that? What they mean by that is that corrupted principle, what's going to be the result of that principle? What's going to be, what are the consequences of that principle? And likewise, what is the intention of the person and the people who adhere and support and promote that principle? What do they want to gain from saying we cooperate in that which we agree upon and excuse each other from that which we disagree upon? This is what our brothers have stated, and they didn't make this up. They got this from the ulama. They just put it in a nice way so that we can understand it. Number one, here's one of the implications and practical effects of that corrupted principle from Hassan al-Banna. Number one, unrestricted accommodation and cooperation with all innovators. That's one of the results of that principle. Unrestricted accommodation and cooperation with all innovators. We'll say it a third time. And reason why probably some of you can't write it down quickly is because all you do is just listen. You don't write. Unrestricted accommodation. And don't depend on the recording because it may not record. There was one time Abdul Aziz tried to record and he didn't have enough hard drive space and we lost the recording. So don't wait. Don't depend on the recordings, brothers. We'll say it a third time and that's it. Unrestricted accommodation and cooperation with all innovators. Number 2, nullification of any jarh or tajreeh. Don't ask me how to spell it the way you want to spell it. We don't have time. Nullification of any jarh and tajreeh and tabdi' of the innovators. And we gave you what is jarh, and we gave you what is tabdi'. We didn't give you what is tajreeh. Tajreeh is another way to say, inshallah, jarh. Jarh is criticism. Tabdi' is to make someone an innovator, to deem someone an innovator. So the second one, nullification. That principle that he made up is a nullification of any jarh, criticism, or saying that someone is an innovator that needs to be said that he's an innovator. The person that needs to be said that he's an innovator because he has actually become an innovator nullifies all that. That principle nullifies all that. Number 3, the destruction of al-wala and al-bara around the Salafi aqeedah and manhaj. Number 3, the destruction of al-wala and al-bara around the Salafi aqeedah and manhaj. And inshallah, this coming Friday, we'll discuss what is in general the difference between aqeedah and manhaj. This coming Friday, inshallah. What is the difference between aqeedah and manhaj? Number 4, removal of social and methodological barriers. Removal of social and methodological barriers between Salafis and the people of innovation. That's what that false principle produces. Number 1, unrestricted accommodation and cooperation with all innovators. Number 2, nullification of any criticism and tabdi' of the innovators. Number 3, destruction of al-wala and al-bara around the Salafi aqeedah and manhaj. And number 4, the removal of the social and those methodologies, those methodological barriers between Salafis and the people of bid'ah. The people of bid'ah. Then our brothers, Hafethahullah, they say in a nutshell, all of what we just mentioned, there's the abolition, meaning the abolishment. The abolition of jarh, no more criticism. From that principle that he made up, if a person follows those principles, he implements them, then there's no more criticism of any Muslims. No more jarh. No more tajreeh of the innovators. No more criticism of the deviants. So fundamentally, then you have a principle that just breaks down the wall, and that brings in tamyiz, and everybody is on the Rodney King dawah. Why can't we all just get along? That's what happens. No more jarh, no tabdi', no more wala, no more bara. It's destroyed. The response that the ulama and our brothers have derived from those ulama, the response, and you won't be able to write this down, just listen. when the Salafi Aqidah, this is the response to that, when the Salafi Aqidah spread at the hands of the Salafi scholars in the 70s and the 80s. The 70s and the 80s. Because when I came to Salafiyya, walillahi alhamd, when I started ascribing to Salafiyya was 1982. 1982, 83. When I began to ascribe to Salafiyya, my first introduction was 79, but I didn't start ascribing to it around until 1981, 82, 83. There were no issues of minhaj. We didn't even know what the word minhaj was, basically, except for what Allah mentions in the Quran about minhaj, because the word is mentioned in the Quran, minhaj, all right, in another form. So there were no issues for us, because everything in those days was really just aqidah. Because we didn't have the ability to make a differentiation, to distinguish between the people who were truly upon Salafiyya and the people who weren't. So the same thing that was happening to the brothers in England was happening to us. But there were some differences and some benefits that the brothers in the UK had that we didn't have. So, as our brothers have mentioned, those things that the Muhajirun, the people of Tamyi', and we already learned what that is, walillahi alhamd, these are some of the things they don't want you to, they hope that you never learn. All right? Hassan al-Banna, he brings this false principle. Let us cooperate in that which we agree, and let us pardon each other on those things that we disagree. And we already read the implications and the practical effects of that. The response to that is when the Salafi Aqidah spread at the hands of the Salafi scholars in the 70s and the 80s onwards. And I stopped there because the reason why we stop here at the 70s and the 80s in not continuing with the quote from the brothers is that from my attempt to go back in history, American Muslim history, to see when exactly Salafiyya came to America, it seems from my own personal research, it seems as though it came around the 40s. The Salafiyya came in America, was introduced around the 40s. Because there were people here from those lands that Al-Aqidatu Salafiyya existed like Saudi Arabia. There were people here. Because once again, I started being introduced in the 70s, the late 70s, and started ascribing to it in the early 80s. And there were people who were already here in the 70s and in the 60s. I know that for a fact because some of them were my teachers. And there was a magazine, a Salafi magazine, the first Salafi magazine in the Arabic language. It was called Al-Hijra magazine. And the first time it began in English was in the year of 1984. Al-Hijra magazine, coming from Syracuse, New York. And then the base of it in English was in Newark, New Jersey, on Branford Place. I'm trying to give you brothers some history. Trying to give you some history because our brothers Abu Hassan Malik and Abu Yusuf Khalifa and Hassan Somali, they keep saying over and over, and Anwar Ibn Wright, they keep saying over and over and over again, Dawud, you have to give us the history. We have to record it because you're the only one that knows it. No one else really knows it from amongst us, from amongst the African American Muslims. The only one that would probably remember in detail is dead. Rahimahullah, Abu Uwais. That's it. I'm the last one. So they say you have to record it. You have to tell us what happened, what was going on, names, dates, time, so we can keep it recorded. So from what I've seen, and Allah knows best, it looks like around the 40s. There were people who were here. There was even someone here in Philadelphia, but he was killed, who it looks like he was trying to bring people to this aqidah, and inshallah, Allah knows best as manhaj. His name was Muhammad Aslam. Muhammad Aslam, rahimahullah, Pakistani brother. And we had a few of them around the United States 40, 50 years ago. And we can get to that, inshallah. So, the response to that corrupted principle from Hassan al-Banna, when the Salafi Aqidah spread at the hands of the Salafi scholars in the 70s and the 80s onwards, like we mentioned, those brothers in England, they had an advantage. Before the Adhan, we said we will mention it. They had an advantage. There were some advantages. One of the big, huge advantages that the brothers in the UK had that we don't have, or that we didn't have and still don't have, is their geographical closeness to Saudi Arabia. A trip on the plane from Saudi Arabia to America takes about 12 hours. A trip on the plane from Saudi Arabia to the UK takes about 5.5, 6 hours. So those ulama were coming back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Wasn't like that for us in America. It wasn't like that. You see? But for those brothers, Sheikh Muhammad ibn Hadi al-Madkhali, he was going back and forth. Sheikh from Medina. Sheikh Muhammad al-Anjari, Falah Ismail, from Kuwait, they were going back and forth. Sheikh Yahya al-Hajuri from Yemen, Damaj, he was going back and forth. There were quite a few ulama that were going back and forth. Even Sheikh al-Albani was visiting. He even came to America twice. Some rich history, brothers. So, the brothers, they say, so it became clear that Ahlus Sunnah opposes the innovators, boycott them, disparage them, and warn from them and their books. This became known and widespread in the 70s and the 80s. So some individuals who were really upon the Ikhwani minhaj sought to revive a new manifestation of the innovation of Hassan al-Banna from what year? No, the 30s and the 40s. The 30s and the 40s. So now some people who were actually Trojans amongst the Salafis, Ikhwanis amongst the Salafis, because the Salafi youth at that time, we didn't understand the issues of minhaj. Because it wasn't an issue. Everybody was saying they were Salafi. In fact, back in the early 80s, I used to, with some brothers that introduced me to the Aqidah to Salafiyah, we used to call ourselves Salafi Wahhabi. Our lessons we used to study. Salafi, we're Salafi Wahhabi. That's what we used to call ourselves in the early 80s. And two of those brothers that introduced me to this, they're Sufis now. Ibrahim Abdul Aziz and Sharif Abdul Karim, two African American brothers from New York. So they say, so some individuals who were really upon the Ikhwani minhaj sought to revive a new manifestation of the bid'ah of Hassan al-Banna, right? Knowing that it is inevitable that Ahlus Sunnah disparage and warn against the innovators. They try to neutralize the effects of this disparagement, even though the real intent was hoping for its abolition, to abolish it completely. But this was not possible for historical reasons. They couldn't do it. So if you go back, brothers, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and look at those people who claim to be calling to Salafiyah, some of them were actually Salafi, they were Salafi. But many of them were actually plants. They were sleeper cells. Ikhwanis, talking about the Aqidah of the Salaf. Sheikh al-Albani says, Sheikh bin Baz says, Sheikh Uthaymeen says. And to this day, you still hear them saying that. And to this day, some of you are tricked because of that. But the brother says, Sheikh Al-Albani. But the brother reads from the books of Sheikh Al-Albani, Sheikh Al-Uthaymin. He's got his pants above his ankles. He's got a beard. He's always saying a Salafi Saleh. So what? You need to go study. If that's what you think is an indication of somebody's Salafiyah, you need to really study, buddy. You need to really study. Because all you have to do is just do one of our principles that Ibn Taymiyyah even mentioned in some of his books, like the Fatawa, Majmu' Fatawa, that is permissible for us, and sometimes is even obligatory for us to make imtihan by ashkhas, to test people by other people. What do we mean by that? Okay, you say that brother so-and-so says he's upon the minhaj of the Salaf. Why? Because he's quoting from the books of Sheikh Al-Albani. He's quoting from the books of Sheikh bin Baz. He says he loves Sheikh bin Baz. He loves Sheikh Al-Uthaymin. Okay, now, ask him what does he say about Sheikh Muhammad Aman al-Jami. Ask him what he says about Sheikh Ahmed al-Najmi. Ask him what he says about Sheikh Rubi'. Ask him what he says about Sheikh Ubaid. And then you'll really see what kind of Salafiyah he's upon. See, because those other ulama, that's a trick that they use because y'all don't know. See, you're not studying. You don't know. So they catch you. He's always quoting Sheikh Al-Albani. He gotta be Salafi. No. Test him by Sheikh Rubi'. What does he say about Sheikh Rubi'? And we already told you what Usama al-Qusi said. Right? Didn't we a couple of classes ago? We told you what what Usama al-Qusi said. May Allah guide him. So now you use other people who are known for what? Al-Jarh wa Ta'dil. Right? As a specialization. Sheikh Rubi', Sheikh Ubaid, Sheikh Ahmed al-Najmi, Sheikh Muhammad Aman al-Jami, my Sheikh, rahimahullah. Ask them about them. It's like Imam Ahmed, he said, if you hear anybody disparaging or talking about Hamad ibn Salama, then you should doubt their deen. Doubt their deen. You can find this in Sharh al-Sunnah, Imam al-Barbahari. You can find this in the books of Aqeedah and Minhaj of the Salaf. So we say the same thing. If you hear somebody talking about Sheikh Rabi'a, doubt their Salafiyah. Doubt their Salafiyah. You hear them talking about Sheikh Ubaid, doubt their Salafiyah. That's why the brothers, they always going and mentioning those other ulama who are our ulama. Sheikh Wasiullah al-Abbas, Sheikh Abdul Muslim al-Abbad, Sheikh Luhaydan, Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab al-Aqil. Those are ulama, we love them. And we don't put them in disdain. But you don't hear them talking about the other ones. But you always see them going to them for certain things. See? Can we invite the kuffar politicians to the Eid? You see? I bet you they didn't go to Sheikh Rabi'a with that. I bet you they didn't go to Sheikh Ubaid with that. And if Sheikh bin Baz and Al-Albani were alive, and Uthaymin, they wouldn't have said that. Rahimahumullah. How do we know? Because we already asked them. We've already asked them when they were alive about those types of things. What Salafi in his right mind this coming Friday would take Jum'ah to Capitol Hill? What Salafi do you know of that's clearly upon Salafiyah and understands the manhaj of the Salaf that would take Jum'ah, like they getting ready to do, to Capitol Hill? So, that first generation of Tamyi' was with Hassan al-Banna. Now the brothers, they say, the first counter reaction of those deviants is in the 80s and the 90s. When the vast majority of you sitting here didn't have a clue on what Salafiyah was. The vast majority of you sitting here. In the 80s, some of you weren't even Muslims, let alone Salafi. Is that not right, brothers? Okay, so listen to the history. So now they're going to come back. Hassan al-Banna's dead. They have to revive some stuff now. Now we're talking about the 80s and the 90s. And let me tell you, the first Salafi conference in America was in Maryland. The very first one. Major. Like we have the Rahma conferences now. The first Salafi conference was in the state of Maryland. Were you there, Jeraj?
No, I was at the camp with you.
You were at the camp in Maryland.
That was.
Who was the sheikh that spoke?
No, that was later. We went to the one in Maryland.
No, that was the first one. That was the first Salafi conference. Who was the sheikh that was speaking? It was Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq. Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq. Now, some brothers are saying subhanAllah, but the most of you don't even know who he is. Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq is a graduate of the Islamic University. He was a student of Sheikh Al-Albani for at least a dozen years. At least. And he was upon Salafiyah. In fact, when I was working as a chaplain in the prison system in New York, I tried to get all of the Muslim chaplains to standardize the Aqidah and the Minhaj in all the prisons so that no matter where an inmate was transferred to, he would get the same Aqidah. And those were some of the books that I was planning on using and that I did use were the books of Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq, walillahi alhamd. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed us to gain insight and clarity on that deviant innovator who left Salafiyah, who was a student of Sheikh Al-Albani, Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq, who was the one who was speaking to us live in America in the 80s, in the early 80s. Alhamdulillah, we never got it. The brothers knocked it down. Those chaplains, they knocked it down and it didn't come off. Walillahi alhamd. Walillahi alhamd. But in that time, he was upon Salafiyah, inshallah. He was upon Salafiyah. And where is he from? Just take a guess. Egypt. He's from Egypt. And he's the sheikh of what group? Jami'iyya Ihya Turath. We told you about it the other day. The place, that group that claims Salafiyah that Abu Usama al-Dhahabi, may Allah guide him, worked for years. Years. All right? So now they come back with a counter reaction in the 80s and the 90s. Al-Awda. Al-Awda. This is a person. His first name is what? Salman Al-Awda. Right? Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq. And Ar'ur. Ar'ur. His first name is Adnan. Adnan Ar'ur. Adnan Ar'ur, Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq, and Salman Al-Awda. Listen to what they developed from Hassan al-Banna. They brought bid'ah and placed it on top of the bid'ah that Hassan al-Banna had done in the 30s and the 40s. Al-Awda, Salman Al-Awda, listen to what he said. This is one of the principles that he made up. Mentioning good points when criticizing is justice. Mentioning good points when you criticize somebody is adl, is justice. That's a corrupted, false principle. In Arabic, it's called al-muwazana, not muwazana, muwazana, long vowel, muwazana. That's called al-muwazana, which is counterbalancing good with evil. In other words, this false principle is when you criticize someone for their deviations or their innovations, he said you have to say something good about them too. You see? Corrupted principle. Hassan al-Banna didn't bring that one, he brought that one. Who brought it? Salman Al-Awda. Salman Al-Awda. What country is he from? No. Saudi Arabia. He's not from Egypt. Saudi Arabia. But where did he learn that from? Who were his teachers? The Ikhwan al-Muslimin. How did the Ikhwan al-Muslimin's influences come to Saudi Arabia? Anybody know? Huh? The Saudi Arabian government, out of their kindness and mercy to the Muslims in the bordering areas, the bordering lands, Egypt is right next door, right across the Red Sea, right? When those things started happening in those countries and people started becoming refugees, Saudi Arabia opened the doors, said, "Tafaddalu, come on, ahlan wa sahlan, wa marhaban bikum, welcome." So those people from Egypt, those people from Palestine, Jordan, those people from Lebanon, those people from Iraq, those people from Syria, those people from Tunisia, those people from Libya, those people from Morocco, they started coming in. We're going back now, 50 years. So when they came, they became part of the society, part of the fabric of the society. But when they came with their viruses at the same time. And they had wives and they had children. Their children grew up in the Saudi society. They went to school with the Saudis. They learned the correct aqidah, because you can bet your last Islamic dollar that they didn't get the correct aqidah in Egypt, for the most part, and in Lebanon, and in Syria, and in Algeria. They weren't getting the correct aqidah in those places, more specifically in those universities or schools. So when they came, they learned the aqidah of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, rahimahullah, right? Who learned his aqidah from Ibn Taymiyyah, who learned his aqidah from Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, who learned his aqidah from the Imams of the Salaf before him, who learned their aqidah from the Sahaba. You see? So now, just like here in America, you had those people who grew up amongst the people of Salafiyah. But when their children, when they had their children, their grandchildren, now they have become a part of the society. They're in the government, Department of Finance, the Department of Economics, the Department of Petroleum. They're all over the place. They're all over the place. You see? And their ideologies were there. So people like Salman al-Auda, when he's in school now in the Islamic University, you have teachers there from Egypt, teachers there from Syria, teachers there from Sudan, from the children of the refugees, the parents of the refugees. They're teaching. When I was a student in the Islamic University in '87, before the Saudiization began, Saudiization meaning taking out the other teachers who weren't actually Saudis and putting in Saudi teachers, my teachers were from Sudan, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Egypt. That's where they were from. All right. So now those people started coming out. They started coming out. And that's why Salman al-Auda, Safar al-Hawali, who are pure Saudis, they began to learn from those people. Osama bin Laden began to learn from those people. They didn't have to go to Egypt to learn it. It was already there, planted from the children of the children. You understand, brothers? It was already there. Like the ideologies of Abdullah Azzam. Abdullah Azzam. The one who called to takfir in jihad. The one who, when he was there in Afghanistan, had the Mujahideen writing on the side of the missiles, Sayyid Qutb mission. This is history, brothers. And those things of what we have now have entered America. This is not like just this year, last year. We're talking about 40, 50 years ago. So, Salman al-Auda mentioning good points when criticizing is adl, is justice. You have to mention the good points. Based on what? Based on his corrupted, made-up principles. But if you go back to the book of Allah, you'll find a refutation of that. When you go back to the pure Sunnah, you'll find refutations for that. That this is clearly against the manhaj of the Salaf, that when you disparage somebody, you got to say, the Jamaat al-Tabligh, man, we know they got shirk, man. We know they call people to the graves. Man, but look how many people they've invited to Islam, and look how many people have come and taken shahada by their hands, and look. No, that's not the manhaj of the Salaf to talk about good points. What's one of the reasons, brothers? Because if you talk about the person's good points, that waters down what needs to be done about them in their quarantine. That'll make somebody say, well, maybe they're not really that bad. You see? Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq. This is one thing that he made up. Multiplicity of jama'at is permissible and is beneficial. Multiplicity, meaning having different groups. The more Islamic groups, the better. The more Islamic groups, the better. And what they mean by that, of course, the more Islamic political groups. Al-Awda, he also made this principle, differentiating between Al-Firqatul Najiyah and Ta'ifatul Mansura, so that they enter the Jama'at into Firqatul Najiyah. Once again, these are terminologies that you're not familiar with, but you have to come up to speed, brothers. You have to upgrade your knowledge. Al-Firqatul Najiyah simply in English is what? The saved sect. At-Ta'ifatul Mansura is what? The victorious group. Both of them are what? Salafiyah. That's the Salafis. Al-Firqatul Najiyah and Ta'ifatul Mansura. But with this particular principle that Salman al-Awda does, he differentiates between Al-Firqatul Najiyah and Ta'ifatul Mansura, which we'll come to inshallah. We won't come to it tonight. We'll come to it Friday inshallah. Also, Al-Ar'ur, that is Adnan Ar'ur, who used to come regularly to America. We used to sit with him in private and public. We know him personally. He's one of the oldest students of Sheikh Al-Albani. And that's how they catch you again. But he's a student of Sheikh Al-Albani. He was with Sheikh Al-Albani for 28 years, 22 years, 16 years. Big deal. So what? You were a student with him, so what? That's not an indication of your manhaj because you study with somebody. Do you know how many Hizbis and Khalafis study with Sheikh Muqbil? You know how many people of deviation studied with Sheikh Muqbil in his camp before he died? You know how many people sat in the circles of Sheikh al-Uthaymeen for years? That's not an indication that somebody is Salafi because they sat with a Sheikh. And it's not an indication because you graduated that you know. Sheikh Salih Fawzan and the other ulama, past and today, they all have mentioned this, all of them, which we will also bring some of their statements, inshallah, this Friday. Inshallah. So Ar'ur, that is Adnan Ar'ur, he said, we correct the error, but we don't make jarh of the person. Corrupted, false, made-up principle. We correct the error, but we don't make jarh of the person. Have we not heard this, brothers? Huh? Have we not heard this from some of our brothers? Correct the error, just point out the mistakes, but don't say anything about the brother himself. That's a corrupted principle that the teacher of Adnan Ar'ur refuted. What's the teacher's name? Sheikh Al-Albani. That's a corrupted principle that one of the teachers that I consider one of my teachers of the past, Mustafa Al-Adawi from Egypt, who was a student of who? Who? Nobody knows? Muqbil. Sheikh Muqbil refuted that. He refuted that. Sheikh al-Uthaymeen refuted that. Sheikh bin Baz refuted that. Sheikh Ubaid refuted that. Sheikh Rabi'a refuted that. Sheikh Salih Fawzan refuted this false principle that we correct the error, but we don't disparage the person. That is an Ikhwani principle. And Ali Hassan al-Halabi says the same thing. Nusahhihu وَلَا نَجْرَحُ. We correct, but we don't wreck. We correct, but we don't wreck. We say it like that so you can understand. And some of our brothers that claim to be upon Salafiyah say the same thing. Say the same thing. And we listening to their tapes, listening to their CDs, letting them speak in the messages of Salafiyah. They say the same thing. We correct, but we don't disparage. We just correct the error. We don't disparage the person. Wallahi, brothers, learn Salafiyah. Learn Salafiyah, brothers. You have to learn these principles. We continue. Our brothers say, all the above. We take the good and leave the bad. Where do you get that principle from? That's the principles of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. We work on what we agree with, and we excuse on that which we don't agree with. Hasan al-Banna. So we're ended here, inshallah, for the salat, and we'll continue on Friday, inshallah. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد.